Aktarsana when you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Donald Trump doubles down on bringing Greenland under U.S. control, drawing sharp warnings from European leaders. A commuter train derailed near Barcelona, killing the driver and injuring dozens, raising safety concerns in Spain's rail network. And U.S. President invites more leaders to Board of Peace for Gaza. U.S. President Donald Trump has doubled down on his push to bring Greenland under U.S. control, refusing to rule out force as he heads to the World Economic Forum in Davos. European leaders have pushed back sharply, warning against intimidation and threats to sovereignty.
US President Donald Trump says there is no going back on his ambition to take control of Greenland. Speaking at the White House before his departure to the World Economic Forum, Trump said negotiations were planned in Switzerland and suggested a deal could still be reached.
Look, they need that agreement very badly with us. They really do. They fought very hard to get it, so I doubt that. But we'll see what happens. We have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland. I'm leaving tonight, as you know, for Davos, and we have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland. And I think things are going to work out pretty well, actually.
Earlier, Trump refused to rule out the use of force and warned of sweeping tariffs on European goods if allies oppose his plan, raising fears of a renewed transatlantic trade war and strains within NATO. In Davos, European leaders moved quickly to respond. President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said the European Union stands in full solidarity with Greenland. French President Emmanuel Macron warned against intimidation and rejected what he called the law of the strongest.
We do believe that we need more growth, we need more stability in this world. But we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
European Union leaders have said that US tariffs linked to Greenland could trigger retaliation, including wide-ranging trade measures. Meanwhile, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen once again reiterated that she would not yield to Trump's demands and abandon Greenland.
Because this is about much more than ourselves. We can negotiate about everything: political, security, investments and economics. But we cannot negotiate about our fundamental values: sovereignty, the identity of our countries and our borders, our democracy.
Both the Greenlandic and Danish governments have repeatedly said the Arctic territory is not for sale and that its future can only be decided by its people.
The main political groups in the European Parliament have said they will delay ratifying the EU-US trade deal due to President Donald Trump's tariff threats over Greenland. Trump announced that from the 1st of February, Washington will impose 10% tax on goods from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands and Finland. It is set to rise to 25% from the 1st of June. He said the measures will remain in place until a deal is reached for United States to acquire Greenland, a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Over to Ukraine, where a Russian airstrike has left more than 1 million people in Kiev without power, hitting key substations linked to Ukraine's nuclear plants. Kiev says the attack risks nuclear safety and is being used as a tool of pressure. The strikes come amid renewed diplomatic efforts for peace, adding fresh tension to the conflict.
Ukrainians are having to continue to deal with freezing temperatures after a Russian airstrike on Tuesday left more than 1 million people in Kiev without power. The attack also damaged substations that carry electricity from Ukraine's nuclear plants. Kiev accused Moscow of using the risk of nuclear disaster as a tool of coercion. Ukrainian officials say Moscow used 330 drones and nearly 30 missiles, killing 4 people. 3 were in Zaporizhia and 1 in the Kyiv region. Other parts of eastern, southern and northern Ukraine were also hit. This was the second major strike on Ukraine's capital this month. Emergency crews are working around the clock to restore power and heating as temperatures drop to minus 13 degrees Celsius. President Volodymyr Zelensky said more than 4,000 buildings had no heating. Deputy Prime Minister Oleksiy Kuleba said 68 repair teams were working in the capital. More than 1,400 emergency heating centers have been opened for residents to warm up and charge phones. The International Atomic Energy Agency said several key substations were damaged. Power lines to other nuclear plants were also affected. Ukraine gets more than half of its electricity from nuclear energy. The agency added that the Chernobyl plant briefly lost all external power but was later reconnected. In the northern Chernihiv region, authorities said 87% of residents were left without electricity. Russia said it struck military, energy and transport targets. At the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, US and Russian envoys called talks on a possible peace deal positive and constructive. Zelensky urged Washington to increase pressure on Moscow, saying current measures were not enough. He said he would go to Davos if the US agreed to sign security guarantees and a post-war recovery plan. Ukrainian officials say in total, Russia has destroyed about 8.5 gigawatts of Ukraine's power capacity since late October.
Spain's rail network is under renewed scrutiny after another deadly derailment near Barcelona. A commuter train left the tracks following heavy rain on Tuesday, killing the driver and injuring dozens. It's just days after a major high-speed crash in the south of the country. Emergency crews were deployed overnight as investigators assess safety concerns on Spain's busy suburban rail lines.
A commuter train derailed near Barcelona after a containment wall collapsed onto the tracks during heavy rainfall, killing the driver and leaving dozens injured. Claudi Gallardo, inspector of Catalonia Fire Department, said emergency crews found multiple injured passengers at the scene. He confirmed the driver was killed and 4 people were seriously hurt. He added that all passengers were safely removed from the train as rescue operations continued. The derailment occurred in the early hours near the town of Gelida, about 35 kilometers from Barcelona. Emergency services deployed around 20 ambulances and dozens of firefighters as police secured the area. Authorities said 37 people were injured in total. The suburban line has long faced criticism over underinvestment and repeated safety incidents as investigators now examine whether weather conditions and structural failures contributed to the crash. The incident comes just 2 days after Spain's deadliest rail disaster in more than a decade, when a high-speed train crash in southern Córdoba province killed 42 people. Rail officials also reported a separate disruption on the Barcelona commuter network later the same day after a train axle came off the track near Girona.
A major shake-up in Dutch politics as 7 MPs leave the Geert Wilders far-right PVV party to form a new group under Guido Marquesauer. The split weakens Wilders, opens the way for more cooperation in coalition talks and could shift the balance of power in The Hague. Our Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe and a major shakeup in Dutch politics. 7 members of the far-right Party for Freedom, or PVV, led by Geert Wilders, quit the party's 26-member parliamentary faction to form a new group, which will be led by long-serving MP Guido Marquesauer. It's a serious internal blow to Wilders' leadership since the PVV was founded in 2006. He says the defection spells a loss of his friendship with Marquesauer, but Wilders insists his party will survive this crisis. Still, this split exposes deep fractures over strategy and direction. The lawmakers wanted to assess the PVV's, or rather Wilders' disappointing performance in the last election, which Wilders was opposed to, and they opposed Wilders' hardline leadership style, where he was the only actual party member and called most of the shots himself. They seek a broader profile, as the PVV focused mostly on anti-immigration and Eurosceptic policies. They also want more cooperation with other parties amid coalition talks to form a new government. While Wilders refused to have any talks with the three parties brokering a new minority coalition, Marcus Sauer says he can't imagine the attitude of not wanting to be at the table. The split significantly shrinks the PVV and its influence in the 150-seat Tweede Kamer, or House of Representatives. It paves the way for the Green Left, or Labour Party, to emerge as the largest opposition force. This fallout goes well beyond party politics, with the PVV weakened and a breakaway group signaling a more cooperative approach. The balance of power in The Hague is shifting at a critical moment in government formation. Whether this marks the start of a broader recalibration of the Dutch far right or merely a temporary setback for Geert Wilders, it will shape not only the next coalition, but also the Netherlands' future course on immigration and its role inside the European Union. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
European farmers are stepping up pressure on European Union leaders over the Mercosur trade deal. With key parliamentary votes approaching, protesters warn the agreement could threaten farming standards and livelihoods across Europe.
Farmers staged protests outside the European Parliament in Strasbourg on Tuesday, opposing the EU-Mercosur trade agreement as lawmakers prepare to vote on its legal future. Many of the demonstrators arrived with tractors, holding banners accusing the deal of unfair competition and lower agricultural standards. Police were deployed around the Parliament building.
We have lost a battle, but not the war. Today, the fight is to take this case to the Court of Justice. We hope members of the European Parliament will agree that the protocol used by Ursula von der Leyen is not the right one.
The head of France's main farmers' union urged EU lawmakers to seek a legal review of the Mercosur deal.
We are calling on all EU lawmakers to take up the issue, including perhaps some who might actually be in favour of Mercosur, because asking whether this agreement is or is not compliant with European law is a valid question, especially concerning the famous rebalancing clause.
The European Parliament will vote on Wednesday on whether to refer the agreement to the EU Court of Justice and suspend ratification. The deal, signed last weekend in Paraguay, could potentially become the EU's largest trade agreement after 25 years of negotiations. Lawmakers are also expected to vote on Thursday on a motion of censure against the European Commission regarding the Mercosur deal, the fourth such challenge to Ursula von der Leyen's administration. Farmers say protests will continue across France in the coming days as pressure grows on European leaders over the controversial agreement.
The World Economic Forum in the Swiss town of Davos has entered its third day. US President Donald Trump is expected to attend, where he will address the forum. Our own Orkan Amashov joins us with details. Orkan, thank you for joining us. And what key economic and geopolitical priorities are emerging as the World Economic Forum enters its third day?
Hello, Bakhtiar. Today, probably the most important day of the World Economic Forum annual meeting. President Donald Trump is going to deliver his speech later in a couple of hours. Well, the World Economic Forum is about global elite, about global economic discourse. It looks like that today, whatever is represented by means of World Economic Forum about this congregation is actually collapsing in front of our eyes, because ultimately the new world order is emerging, and the old order this forum is not just about the manifestation of its erosion, but actually the clear signal that something else is happening. Two key important points to bear in mind, Bakhtiar. One is that over Greenland, the trade war between Europe and United States, and also President Donald Trump's invitation addressed and sent to European countries, France and UK, with regard to a peace board which has not been accepted, means that it's not just that we're observing the rupture of transatlantic alliance, but the very future of United Nations itself is also a massive, massive question. Allow me to add one more point about Azerbaijan. Very important point. Azerbaijani State Oil Fund has signed a strategic document with Brookfield Asset Management involving about $1.4 billion in infrastructure investments. Very similar arrangement to what was agreed yesterday with BlackRock, the world's greatest asset manager. These are the key topics related to the developments, both on the global stage and also in relation to South Caucasus, in particular to Azerbaijan.
Orkan Amashov, thank you very much for the latest updates. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bakhtiar. Thank you.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss rising geopolitical tensions at Davos as President Donald Trump's remarks on tariffs and Greenland spark sharp reactions from European leaders. Stay tuned.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. Monsieur Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب أهلية.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back to A News. The World Economic Forum in Davos is once again a stage for sharp geopolitical divides. US President Donald Trump is expected to speak today amid growing concern in Europe over his threat to impose tariffs on EU countries unless they support a US takeover of Greenland. French President Emmanuel Macron has warned that the world is drifting away from rules and international law toward what he described as the law of the strongest, while EU leaders have openly compared Trump's approach to that of Vladimir Putin, stressing that no country has the right to seize another's territory, whether in Ukraine or Greenland. So what does this escalating rhetoric mean for transatlantic relations, global trade, and the future of the rules-based international order? To discuss this, I'm joined now by Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat joining us from Japan. Mr. de Aristegui, welcome to A News.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Ambassador de Aristegui, President Macron warned of a shift toward a world without rules. Do you agree that international law is genuinely being sidelined? And also the EU has compared Donald Trump's territorial rhetoric to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Is that comparison fair, or does it risk inflaming tensions further?
Well, I don't think it's exactly precise. What the President of the United States is doing in regard to Denmark, the European Union, its NATO allies that are not members of the European Union, and specifically the autonomous territory of Greenland, is completely insane. It's insane in the concept, it's insane in the method, it's insane in the message. But the problems that President Trump is signaling about a serious problem of security growing in that part, and the serious risk that China and Russia can take over or influence that territory if the independentist separatist movement continues to be fueled by China and Russia, that is a fact. Therefore, you cannot compare both situations. And is a major problem for the stability, peace, security of the West. The fleet base, formerly called Thule, is essential for the defense of the United States and for guiding American ACBMs if ever, God forbid, they need to be fired. But if you see the map, it is the closest point between continental Russia and the United States and Canada. Any country that dominates Greenland will dominate eventually the gateway of the Arctic Sea into the North Atlantic Ocean, therefore the new routes, the new sea routes that will probably be the most important ones in world trade and commerce in the coming decades. But the method, the aggressiveness, the rhetoric that has been used by President Trump is, sorry to say, I am not the worst critic of President Trump, completely insane. It is unacceptable for an ally and a friend to treat European allies who have been loyal. Loyal means loyal, doesn't mean that has the fidelity of a dog. We are independent sovereign states that chose independently and freely to join an alliance to strengthen the security of the most advanced democracies in the world. This only weakens the plans, the design, and the wishes of our forefathers that in 1949 created the Atlantic Alliance. I really hope that this is going to be just another part of the strategy of President Trump that I could call shock and awe. Go to the exabrupt, try to freeze your opponent by asking the impossible and try to get something lower than that is normally more than he asked for.
Ambassador Dariush Teghi, how significant is President Donald Trump's Greenland-related tariff threat in terms of US-EU relations? And also the EU has hinted at deploying its economic bazooka. What tools does Brussels realistically have, and would it dare to use them against Washington?
Right now, and you know that I have been extremely critical on your show about the weakness and the incapacity of the European Union to react in front of the aggression of big powers, be it Russia, China, or even the bullyish attitudes of the United States of America in recent weeks. But the European Union is 550 million consumers, citizens, inhabitants of the most prosperous, most wealthy union of democracies in the whole planet. We are the most powerful economic, financial, and commercial power in the world when we stand united and we are coordinated. Unfortunately, the political class of Europe is not up to the standards of the crisis that we're living today. But the economic bazooka that has been wrongfully mentioned as a bazooka is more like an electromagnetic pulse bomb. Which could fry world economy and world trade, and it would hurt us too. Let us not forget that the biggest regulating power in the world is the European Commission. Let us not forget that when, for example, and this is just one example, when Boeing wanted to merge with McDonnell Douglas, actually buy it, it had to wait for years until they made a case, convinced the European regulators that it would not create a monopoly or an oligopoly that would seriously hurt competition with other airline or airplane producers, as is the case of Airbus. So they had to wait for years until the European Commission actually authorized nothing but 2 American companies to merge. So that is the real power of the European Union, and it should not be neglected.
Ambassador Dariush Teghi, what does this episode tell us about the future of NATO cohesion and Western unity?
Well, this is exactly the question to be asked, and exactly in this way. NATO cohesion and the transatlantic relation has been the basis of peace and stability, or keeping the world out of a world war or a world conflagration or a nuclear holocaust since 1945. The creation of NATO in 1949 was a huge landmark. It was essential for world stability. Look, if you take all of the conflicts, all of them, since 1945 to 2026, and add all the victims of all of the hundreds and hundreds of conflicts that have been that the world has been suffering, we would still be at 5% of the total of the victims that the Second World War caused. So, in spite of the world being unstable, uncertain, and violent, these past 80 years are a lot better than the previous 80 years. And this is a gift given to humanity by the transatlantic relation, by the European Union, which was foremost a reconciliation strategy between sworn enemies, Germany, France, and others, and of course the Atlantic Alliance, NATO, that has preserved peace through credible deterrence.
So, do you see Europe moving toward greater strategic autonomy, and how are other global actors like China, Russia, or even middle powers likely to interpret this transatlantic friction?
Since for the last 2 years, even before President Trump came to power, it has been a very, very severe, profound, and even acrid discussion and controversy in European circles of power. The Europeans need to understand that it is not the end of history. We cannot reap the benefits of the end of Cold War because it has never ended. The Europeans have relied too heavily on the American big brother for their defense. Mm-hmm. We have the technology, the engineering, the scientists, and the economic muscle if we want to become a serious power, military power, technological power, artificial intelligence power, or even in the informal warfare, defending ourselves against hybrid warfare, against the attacks against our cyber attacks and what have you. But we need to make the effort. We need to commit the funds. We need to coordinate seriously. We need to stop competing among each other. We have to start thinking about the sixth-generation fighter jet. Spain is heavily involved, as is Germany, the United Kingdom, and Italy. In this case, we hope to involve other European countries in this aspect. But the defense and independence of democracies and liberty has a price, and the Europeans have wanted to use those funds in different aspects and probably sometimes mismanaging them. And now is the time to wake up, and this is the message that, as you very well said, is the message that China, Russia, and other middle powers need to understand. The Europeans are not going to be stepped on their toes. We have to grow up and step up to the problems, to the challenges, and to the seriousness of opportunities that lie beyond.
Mm-hmm. Gustavo Daristegi, thank you very much for this discussion and for joining us from Japan. We truly appreciate your time and perspective. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. All the best to you.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to A-News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Syria has announced a ceasefire with Kurdish forces to give them 4 days to agree on integrating into the central state. Damascus says it's aimed at easing tensions and supporting talks on integrating Kurdish fighters, despite recent clashes. It marks another major shift since President Ahmed al-Sharaa came to power.
The Syrian government and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces have agreed to a 4-day ceasefire. It's after swift army advances across the northeast. The temporary pause began on Tuesday evening following the capture of large areas previously held by the SDF. Damascus says the move is intended to support the integration of Kurdish forces into the Syrian state and has asked the SDF to put forward a candidate for Assistant Defense Minister. The SDF says it has accepted the ceasefire and will not act unless attacked, though it reports fresh shelling by government-aligned groups near Hasaka. The SDF also agreed to withdraw from Raqqa and Deir el-Zor, home to Syria's main oil fields, marking the biggest shift in control since President Ahmed al-Sharaa came to power after Bashar al-Assad's fall in 2024. US President Donald Trump said Washington is seeking to protect the Kurds when questioned about Kurdish rights in Syria.
Well, I like the Kurds, but just so you understand, the Kurds were paid tremendous amounts of money, were given oil and other things, so they were doing it for themselves, more so than they were doing it for us. But we got along with the Kurds, and we are trying to protect the Kurds. That's correct.
While the deal is a setback for Kurdish autonomy, the United States says its focus has changed. Envoy Tom Barrack says Washington now views Damascus as its main partner against ISIL, as al-Sharaa pushes to reunify a country still deeply divided by years of war.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said he had a very good call with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Tuesday. The Turkish presidency said they discussed Syria and Gaza. They also talked about fighting Islamic State and the situation of IS prisoners in Syrian jails. It's after Syria's government has taken control of parts of the northeast and ordered the SDF to join the central state. The United States said its partnership with the SDF has changed under the new Syrian government. However, Turkey sees the SDF as linked to the outlawed PKK and wants it to disarm. Erdogan said a stable Syria would boost regional stability. The leaders also discussed Gaza. Erdogan said Turkey would continue working with Washington for peace and thanked President Donald Trump for the Board of Peace invitation. Trump said the call was very important, but gave no further details.
It gets worse. It gets worse.
Azerbaijan has accepted an invitation to join President Donald Trump's new Board of Peace. The US-led initiative aimed at overseeing Gaza's reconstruction is drawing both support and criticism from world leaders.
Azerbaijan says it'll join and become a founding member of US Donald Trump's Board of Peace initiative for Gaza. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev accepted Trump's invitation as a sign of the strong Azerbaijan-US partnership and recognition of the country's role in promoting regional and global peace and stability. The country now joins a growing group of nations, including Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, Morocco's King Mohammed VI, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have also confirmed participation. Other major powers, including Russia and China, have been invited. The Kremlin said President Vladimir Putin is still reviewing the proposal. France, however, has declined to join, prompting Trump to threaten high tariffs on French wine and champagne, a move Paris called unacceptable and ineffective. It was created to oversee the October 2025 ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war in the Strip and to manage Gaza's reconstruction. The initiative was endorsed by the UN Security Council last November and is set to be formally launched at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Under the plan, the board will oversee a transitional Palestinian administration in Gaza, support efforts to disarm Hamas, and deploy an international force to train a new Palestinian police force. Trump has called the board a key platform for long-term stability in the Strip and has suggested it could one day replace the United Nations, which he often criticises as ineffective. The board's charter gives Trump veto power over all decisions and allows him to remain chairman indefinitely unless he resigns or is declared incapacitated by a unanimous vote. Trump says he has invited 58 world leaders to join the board as part of his broader 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza.
Azerbaijan has announced a strategic partnership with global asset manager BlackRock and its subsidiary Global Infrastructure Partners. The cooperation will target major infrastructure and digital projects.
At the Davos Forum, Azerbaijan and BlackRock, along with its subsidiary Global Infrastructure Partners, have formalized a long-term partnership that could involve up to $1.5 billion in infrastructure investments over the next 3 to 4 years. BlackRock is one of the world's largest asset managers, overseeing trillions in investments globally. GIP, its subsidiary, specializes in infrastructure projects and manages major assets such as airports and energy facilities. The collaboration will focus on data centers for cloud computing and artificial intelligence, as well as supporting digital infrastructure that could serve both Azerbaijan and the wider region. Airport infrastructure is also being considered, taking advantage of GIP's experience with major international airports. The agreement will create sector-specific working groups, along with technical sessions and expert discussions to assess potential projects. Officials say this partnership lays the foundation for Azerbaijan to become a regional digital and infrastructure hub, while applying international operational standards.
Speaking at an international forum in Davos during the panel defining Eurasia's economic identity, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev addressed the growing strain on the global economic order. He argued that traditional multilateral institutions are no longer delivering stability and that countries must prioritize sovereignty and national interests to navigate global shocks.
But with respect to the issues of multilateralism, unilateralism, protectionism, we see that everything is crumbling. World Trade Organization is crumbling. By the way, Azerbaijan did not join WTO, though we've been invited for 30 years, just because we want to have economic sovereignty. We want to have political sovereignty, at the same time having good relations with numerous interlocutors. Look, we have strategic partnership documents signed with 10 members of European Union, comprehensive strategic partnership agreement signed with China, strategic partnership charter is being discussed with United States, and all this is possible. It does not contradict one another when you have a clear vision for your country, for your future, when you have power, when you have consolidated society, and when you do what is right, regardless who says what and who will publish some articles about you and what you are doing.
Azerbaijan's role as a regional anchor and investment destination drew rare direct praise from international media and business leaders at Davos on Tuesday. In a public exchange with President Ilham Aliyev, speakers highlighted the country's geopolitical balancing act, its energy strategy, and its growing relevance for Europe and beyond.
As global leaders gathered in Davos for the World Economic Forum this week, Azerbaijan emerged as an unexpected focal point, cited as a case study in resilience, strategic positioning and long-term stability. At the Azerbaijan Executive Breakfast, President Ilham Aliyev was joined by international media and business leaders, including Pedro Vargas, chairman of Euronews. Vargas described Azerbaijan as a rare example of balance between geopolitics, economic reform and social cohesion.
For sure, when your neighbors are Russia, when your neighbors are Iran, when your neighbors are countries who have historically had territorial ambitions, it's not easy to survive. And you need a combination of strength and diplomacy, and that is what I think you have achieved. Azerbaijan is now a country who is ready to receive foreign investment, who is open to that foreign investment.
President Aliyev explained how Azerbaijan has handled sustained international scrutiny, particularly over its role as an energy producer, and why he believes hosting major global events was a necessary, if costly, decision.
We've been accused that we are oil-producing country, and how can oil-producing country host the COP? Though there have been countries before and after Azerbaijan, which produce much more oil than Azerbaijan. But the question was about us, and I said that it's not our fault to have oil. We should not be blamed for that. We must be judged by how we manage the oil wells, how it's fairly distributed in the society. So this was one of the lessons, because frankly speaking, during this 1 year of preparation for COP, I regretted many times that we entered this adventure.
Aliyev said Azerbaijan's international positioning is no longer limited to diplomacy or energy, arguing that global sports and entertainment have become another way the country signals openness, visibility and integration.
Last year, it was first time in Baku, it was a UFC tournament with the participation of leading sportsmen. And that also was on the, how to say, all the main TV channels. So I hope UFC also will be a traditional. Not many countries host UFC, primarily United States. So putting Azerbaijan on the map also demonstrates a capability of our country, because when you...
Turning to Europe, Aliyev acknowledged strong demand for Azerbaijani gas, but noted a disconnect between consumption and investment, contrasting it with deepening cooperation with the United States.
Last year, we exported more than 25 billion cubic meters of natural gas, and almost 13 billion was exported to Europe. And this number will grow. And it was done based on the request from European Commission. After Russian-Ukrainian war started, European Commission President came to Baku, and we signed a document on strategic partnership in the energy sector. And we agreed that we will double our gas supply to Europe from the existing, at that time, almost 8 to 16 BCM. So in some 3 years plus, we already almost reached 13.
Aliyev said Azerbaijan is now positioning itself for the next phase, spanning energy, technology, data infrastructure and strategic connectivity, while urging European partners not to miss the opportunity.
Uzbekistan is launching a new nationwide system to support startups and accelerate digital transformation with grants, tax incentives and large-scale plans to digitize public services. Our correspondent has more.
Uzbekistan is introducing a new system to support startups as part of efforts to strengthen the digital economy and modernize public services. The value of the country's startup and venture ecosystem reached $3.9 billion in 2024-2025, with more than 750 startups backed by 15 venture funds, holding over $180 million in capital. By 2030, Uzbekistan aims to increase the number of startups to 5,000, with at least 200 entering international markets and venture investment rising to $2 billion. To achieve this, a four-stage support system will be introduced, covering idea development, launch and scaling phases through grants, tax incentives, co-financing and export cost compensation. The program is linked to wider digital reforms. The government plans to expand digital public services to 900 and fully digitize key procedures such as opening a business, issuing bank cards and obtaining SIM cards, while artificial intelligence will be introduced in more than 50 services. Uzbekistan is also developing AI infrastructure, including a supercomputer and AI laboratories in 15 universities, aimed at boosting competitiveness, improving governance and raising the quality of life through technology-driven growth. Iris Sivilova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the South Caucasus in the global spotlight, peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and what it means for Eurasia's economic identity. See you shortly.
Vatican, the beating heart of the Catholic world, a place where every stone carries centuries of the Christian history.
This is a real labyrinth. All these niches are graves.
I'm sure this is for the Virgin.
Yes, for a baby. This chamber was completely restored with laser technique thanks to the foundation.
Abbiamo bisogno di persone o di realtà che ci incoraggino, che accendano il nostro coraggio.
Preservare la Basilica di San Paolo non è soltanto un atto di tutela del patrimonio culturale, ma un gesto di responsabilità verso l'umanità intera.
Two papal visits to Baku, both of them highlighting the importance of Azerbaijan's model of harmony.
La visita del Papa Giovanni Paolo II in Baku è stata realmente una visita storica. Presidente che ha regalato per i cattolici un terreno per la costruzione di nuova chiesa.
Ho avuto modo nella visita che abbiamo compiuto in Azerbaijan e ci siamo accorti che c'è un clima di estremo rispetto fra le identità religiose, fra le culture.
L'Azerbaijan dimostra un interesse non soltanto per la propria memoria nazionale, ma per la memoria di tutti i popoli.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back to A News. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, a high-level panel titled Defining Eurasia's Economic Identity has put the South Caucasus firmly in the global spotlight. Speaking at the session, President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev declared that Baku and Yerevan have closed the page on war, pointing to concrete steps toward peace, regional connectivity, and new trade corridors stretching from Asia to Europe. With Armenia and Azerbaijan signaling a shift toward decades of conflict toward cooperation, the implications for Eurasia's economic and geopolitical landscape could be profound. To unpack what this moment means for the region and beyond, I'm joined now by Dr. George Michetishvili, Associate Professor at European University, speaking to us from Tbilisi, Georgia. Dr. Michetishvili, welcome and thank you for joining us. It looks like we have lost connection with our guest, so that wraps up. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned to A News for more.